I met Oscar on a day that should have been like any other. I was running late to work, hurrying down the bustling street, when I saw him. He was standing on the corner, looking a bit lost, with a suitcase by his side. Our eyes met, and something inside me stirred. I couldn't look away. "Excuse me," he called out, stepping towards me. "Do you know how to get to the train station?" I nodded, giving him quick directions. But before I could continue on my way, he did something unexpected. "Wait," he said, "I'm Oscar. I'm leaving the city today, but I'd love to get to know you. Would you like to grab a coffee with me before I go?" It was impulsive, irrational even, but I agreed. We spent the day together, talking and laughing as if we had known each other for years. By the end of the day, when he was supposed to board his train, we were sitting in a small park, the sun setting around us. "Stay," I whispered. "Stay here, with me." Oscar looked at me, a smile spreading across his face. "Let's get married," he said, and just like that, my world changed. We found a small, quaint chapel nearby, with ivy creeping up its old stone walls. The kind, elderly pastor didn't ask too many questions, sensing the urgency and sincerity in our eyes. "I can't believe we're doing this," I said, squeezing Oscar's hand as we stood in front of the pastor. "Neither can I," Oscar replied, his eyes twinkling. But I've never been more certain about anything in my life. The ceremony was simple, just the two of us, standing together, making promises we both intended to keep forever. I remember the way Oscar's hand felt in mine, warm and reassuring. I remember the look in his eyes, the mix of excitement and tenderness that made my heart race. Our families were shocked, to say the least. My parents couldn't understand how I could marry a man I had just met, and Oscar's relatives were wary of this spontaneous union. "Ethel, are you sure about this?" my mother asked when I called to give her the news. "You barely know him." "Mom, I know it sounds crazy, but I love him. I just know it's right," I insisted, my voice trembling with emotion. Oscar's family was equally concerned. His sister, Anna, was particularly vocal about her doubts. "Oscar, this is insane. You've known her for a day," she exclaimed during a tense phone call. "What if it doesn't work out?" "It will," Oscar replied firmly. "I've never felt this way about anyone before, Anna. Trust me." But we didn't care. We were in love, and that was enough. Within months, we had settled into a small house on the outskirts of the city. Life wasn't always easy, but we were happy. 2 years later, our daughter, Emily, was born, and a year after that, we welcomed our son, Ben. Oscar was a wonderful father, doting on our children and always finding ways to make me feel special. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Emily and Ben play in the yard, Oscar turned to me and took my hand. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the golden glow of the setting sun. "How could I forget?" I smiled. "It was the best day of my life." "Mine too," he said softly. "I knew from the moment I saw you that you were the one. Our life, though far from perfect, was ours, and we cherished every moment." Oscar adored me, and I him. We built a home filled with love and laughter, despite the initial doubts from our families. Our days were a blend of routine and surprise, each one cementing the bond we shared. We would spend weekends exploring the city, finding hidden gems in old bookstores and cozy cafes. Oscar loved cooking elaborate meals, and our kitchen was often filled with the delicious aromas of his culinary experiments. "Try this," he would say, holding out a spoonful of his latest creation. "It needs a bit more salt, don't you think?" "It's perfect," I would reply, savoring the flavors and the love he poured into every dish. Our evenings were filled with laughter, storytelling, and dreams about the future. Oscar would read to the children, his voice a soothing balm that lulled them to sleep. "Tell us the one about the brave knight again, Daddy," Emily would beg, her eyes wide with anticipation. "All right, but only if you promise to go to sleep right after," Oscar would say, winking at me as he settled in with the storybook. Life wasn't always smooth, of course. We had our share of disagreements and challenges, but we faced them together, knowing that our love was strong enough to withstand anything. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, I collapsed onto the couch next to Oscar. Some days, I don't know how we do it, I sighed, leaning my head on his shoulder. We do it because we have each other, he said, kissing the top of my head. And that's all we need. Looking back, those were some of the happiest days of my life. We were building something beautiful, something lasting. We had each other, and that was all that mattered. Oscar was my rock, my partner, my best friend. And I was his. Together, we were unstoppable. One chilly autumn evening, Oscar didn't come home from work. At first, I wasn't worried. I thought perhaps he was caught up with a last-minute task or had gone out for drinks with colleagues. As the hours ticked by, however, a knot of fear began to tighten in my stomach. I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I rang his office, only to be told that he had left on time. Panic set in, and I started calling everyone I could think of, retracing his usual route from work, and even visiting the nearby hospitals, hoping and dreading that he might be there. But there was no sign of him. Where could he be? I muttered to myself, pacing the living room while glancing at the clock for the 100th time. Emily and Ben were already asleep, unaware of the turmoil unfolding. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I reported his disappearance to the police. Officer Ramirez, the detective assigned to our case, was kind but realistic. "Mrs. Collins, we'll do everything we can to find your husband," he assured me, handing over a stack of forms to fill out. "But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this might take some time." Days turned into weeks with no word. My heart ached with every passing moment, fear and sorrow weighing heavily on my soul. I felt like I was moving through a fog, everything around me muted and distant. Every time the phone rang, my heart would leap with hope, only to be crushed by another dead end. I had to find a way to keep going for the sake of Emily and Ben. They needed me more than ever, and I couldn't let them see how broken I felt inside. I took on multiple jobs to keep a roof over our heads, working long hours while trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for my children. Oscar's parents were devastated, too. His father's health deteriorated rapidly, and soon I found myself caring for him as well. The burden was immense, but I couldn't let myself falter. I had to be strong, even when I felt anything but. One evening, after putting the children to bed, I sat by the window, staring into the darkness, hoping for a miracle. The silence was suffocating, each second stretching endlessly. A knock at the door broke the stillness. I rushed to open it, heart pounding. Standing there was Anna, Oscar's sister, with tears in her eyes. "Ethel, any news?" she asked, though we both knew the answer. I shook my head, unable to speak. She stepped inside, pulling me into a tight embrace. "We'll find him," she whispered. "We have to." As the weeks turned into months, my routine became a blur of work, childcare, and endless worry. Each day without Oscar was a day filled with more questions and fewer answers. Emily and Ben sensed the tension, their innocent eyes searching mine for reassurance I could no longer provide. One afternoon, Emily tugged at my sleeve while I was preparing dinner. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I knelt down, trying to hold back tears. "Daddy's on a trip, sweetheart. A very long trip. But he'll come back to us. I promise." It was a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but it was the only thing that kept us going. Every night, after putting the children to bed, I would sit by the window, staring into the darkness, hoping for a miracle. One particularly difficult day, I found myself at the police station again, desperate for any news. Officer Ramirez approached me with a sympathetic look. "Mrs. Collins, I wish I had better news. We're doing everything we can, but so far, there are no leads. How can someone just disappear?" I cried, frustration and fear boiling over. "He wouldn't just leave us. Something must have happened. We're treating this as a missing person case," Officer Ramirez said gently. "But these things can be complicated. Sometimes people leave without a trace, and it takes time to find them. We won't give up." I left the station feeling more hopeless than ever. The weight of the world seemed to press down on me, each step home heavier than the last. I had to find a way to keep going, for Emily and Ben, for Oscar, wherever he was. That night, after putting the children to bed, I collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down my face. The house felt empty, each room a painful reminder of Oscar's absence. "Please, Oscar," I whispered into the silence. "Come back to us." Looking back, I don't know how I managed to get through those days. Every morning, I forced myself out of bed, put on a brave face for the kids, and went to work. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but I couldn't let myself falter. I had to be strong, even when I felt anything but. Months turned into years, and the search for Oscar became a part of our daily lives. I held on to the belief that he was out there somewhere, alive and trying to find his way back to us. It was the only thing that kept me going, the hope that one day, our family would be whole again. The years that followed Oscar's disappearance were the hardest of my life. The initial shock and panic gave way to a grinding, relentless endurance. I juggled multiple jobs, waitressing, cleaning houses, and even working at a local factory. Each day was a struggle to make ends meet and to keep the household running. The physical and emotional toll was immense, but I refused to give up. I believed with every fiber of my being that Oscar was still out there. People told me to move on, to think about my future and the future of my children, but I couldn't. My heart wouldn't let me. Every night, I would sit by the window, hoping to see his familiar silhouette walking up the path. Emily and Ben grew up too fast in those years. They had to. They helped around the house, took care of their grandparents, and tried to ease my burden in any way they could. I saw the worry in their eyes, the questions they were afraid to ask. It broke my heart to see them like that, but I knew I had to stay strong for them. One particularly grueling evening, after a long shift at the factory, I returned home to find Emily and Ben doing their homework at the kitchen table. They looked up, their faces lighting up with relieved smiles. "Mom, you're home," Emily said, rushing to hug me. "How was work?" Ben asked, his eyes wide with concern. "It was fine, sweetie," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just a bit tiring, but I'm okay." "Mom, you look so tired," Emily said softly, her eyes filled with worry. "Maybe you should rest for a while." "I will, honey," I assured her, ruffling her hair. "But first, let's get dinner started." Our meals were often simple, but we made the best of what we had. The children never complained, always understanding and supportive. Their resilience was astounding, and their love gave me the strength to keep going. Every Sunday, I visited Oscar's parents, helping them with household chores and tending to his father, whose health continued to decline. One Sunday afternoon, as I was helping Oscar's mother, Helen, in the garden, she paused, looking at me with sad eyes. "Ethel, you're working yourself to the bone," she said, her voice trembling. "You need to take care of yourself, too." "I'm fine, Helen," I insisted, wiping sweat from my brow. "I can't afford to slow down. The kids need me, and so do you and George. We appreciate everything you do," Helen said, tears welling up in her eyes. "But you're carrying too much on your shoulders. Have you thought about moving on?" I froze, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "Moving on? How can I? Oscar is still out there. I can't give up on him." Helen sighed, placing a hand on my arm. "I know, dear. But you also need to think about yourself and the children. It's been 5 years. You deserve to find happiness again." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I can't, Helen. I just can't." Over the next 5 years, I worked tirelessly, taking on every job I could find. The strain showed in my appearance. I had lost a lot of weight, and my hair had started to gray prematurely. Friends and neighbors began to hint that I should think about my future, that maybe it was time to consider remarrying. But I couldn't. I believed with every ounce of my being that Oscar was alive. One day, after losing yet another job, I came across an advertisement for a cook in a wealthy household. The pay was good, better than all my other jobs combined, and it offered stability that we desperately needed. I hesitated at first, doubting my abilities, but my desperation pushed me to apply. I prepared for the interview with a mix of hope and anxiety. I needed this job, not just for the money but for a sense of purpose, something to hold on to in the sea of uncertainty that had become my life. When I arrived at the grand house for the interview, my nerves almost got the best of me. The mistress of the house, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Thompson, scrutinized me from head to toe. I felt exposed, my worn-out clothes and tired eyes betraying the years of struggle. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thompson," I began, trying to steady my voice. "Thank you for seeing me." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Tell me about your experience in cooking." "I've worked in various kitchens over the years," I replied. "I can prepare a wide range of dishes, and I have a passion for creating healthy, delicious meals." Mrs. Thompson studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I'll give you a trial run. Start tomorrow." I left the house feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in years. Maybe this job would be the turning point. Maybe, just maybe, things would start to get better. Little did I know, this job would bring me face to face with the man I had been searching for all this time. That night, I could barely sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of the new job. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to make a good impression. As I approached the grand house, my heart pounded in my chest. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. To my shock, the door was opened by Oscar. He looked different, more polished and confident, but there was no mistaking him. My heart stopped, and for a moment, I thought I might faint. He looked at me with a blank expression, as if he had never seen me before. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm the new cook," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Ah, yes," he replied, stepping aside to let me in. "Follow me. Mrs. Thompson is expecting you." As I followed him through the house, I felt a mix of emotions, shock, confusion, and a glimmer of hope. What had happened to him? Why didn't he recognize me? I needed answers, but I couldn't afford to jeopardize my new job. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, a stark contrast to the cramped spaces I was used to working in. Mrs. Thompson gave me a list of tasks, and I threw myself into the work, trying to keep my mind off the turmoil inside me. Later that evening, after a long day of cooking and cleaning, I returned home, my mind still reeling. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair where Oscar used to sit. "Mom, are you okay?" Ben asked, his voice filled with concern. I looked up, forcing a smile. "Yes, sweetie. I'm just tired. But I think this new job might be a good thing for us." Emily joined us at the table, her eyes bright with hope. "Do you think we'll be able to save up for that vacation we always talked about?" "Maybe," I replied, my heart aching. "Maybe one day." As the weeks passed, I continued to work at the Thompson household, carefully observing Oscar. He seemed happy, but there was a distance in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. I longed to reach out to him, to tell him who I was, but I didn't want to jeopardize his new life or my job. One evening, as I was cleaning up the kitchen, Oscar walked in. He glanced at the photos of Emily and Ben that I had placed on the counter, his eyes lingering on them for a moment. "Those your kids?" he asked, his voice casual. "Yes," I replied, my heart pounding. "Emily and Ben." He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "They're beautiful." "Thank you," I said softly, my eyes searching his face for any sign of recognition. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself drawn to Oscar, despite the pain of his apparent memory loss. I couldn't help but hope that somehow, he would remember me, remember us. It was a fragile hope, but it was all I had left. One stormy evening, Mrs. Thompson was away on business, and Oscar asked me to stay late, saying he wasn't feeling well. As I brought him a cup of tea, he looked at me with a strange intensity. "Ethel," he said softly, the name slipping from his lips like a forgotten memory. "That's your name, right?" I nodded, my heart racing. "Yes, that's right." He looked down at the photo of Emily and Ben, his brow furrowing. "I feel like I should know you," he said, his voice filled with uncertainty. but I can't remember. It's okay, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. Take your time. Over the next few weeks, I brought old photos of our life together, placing them where he could see them. One day, as he looked at a photo of us on our wedding day, something seemed to click. I remember this, he said slowly, his eyes filling with tears. Ethel, I remember. The revelation was overwhelming. He told me about the severe head injury he had suffered, orchestrated by his former boss who wanted him for herself. It had caused his memory loss, and she had taken advantage of the situation, bringing him to her home and pretending to be his wife. Ethel, I'm so sorry, Oscar said, his voice breaking. I never meant to leave you. I never stop. I held him close, tears streaming down my face. It's okay, Oscar. You're back. We decided to leave the city, to start fresh somewhere new. It wasn't easy, but we were together, and that was enough. As we settled into our new life, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. We were a family again, and nothing could take that away from us. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.